Who were these tolerant ladies and camellias? How did the night priestesses live? How were unfortunate women recruited? Why did their careers typically last only 5 years? Who and how controlled the lives of young beauties? What role did the state play in the life of brothels? So, let's experience a day in the life of a prostitute in the Russian Empire. This time our heroine, yes, you got it right, it's that same mysterious woman from Kramskoy's painting. Who posed for him for this picture is still debated among art historians. But everyone is sure the depicted person has lowered social responsibility. Let's call her Josephine. She behaves provocatively and indecently, rides completely alone without a husband or even a servant. This gives her away. At that time, it was a sign of seeking a sponsor. Dressed too brightly and fashionably, she stands out among the ladies of high society, for whom it was improper to blindly follow fashion to such an extent. Such women in the 19th century began to be called camellias after the publication of Alexander Dumas' novel The Lady of the Camellias. Camellias, permanent mistresses, were kept by those who were wealthier. They were considered the most expensive among women with lowered social responsibility. And among them were often girls from brothels, including many foreigners. The 19th century, in general, became the golden age of prostitution in Russia after Nicholas I legalized it in 1844 and took it under state control to combat syphilis. An atypical way to fight a disease, don't you think? Today, the words from the lexicon sound exotic. In addition to camellias, there were also tolerant ladies. This term came from France, where brothels were called houses of tolerance. Tolerant ladies were no longer as free as camellias, they were subject to pimps, who represented them either as an honest widow suffering from lack of affection, or as a mistress of a wealthy old man in need of love, or even as a family woman dreaming of adventures. Men meeting with tolerant ladies believed that they were buying not only a body but also love. Engineer Nikolai Vorontsov describes a funny incident in his memoirs when the manufacturer Kuznetsov wished in the House of Assignations to have not just an ordinary priestess of love, but a good one, unspoiled and family-oriented. Imagine his surprise when his own wife appeared at the door of his room. Rumor has it that he was very jealous of his young wife and restricted her expenses. However, she, not being a fool, upon seeing him, caused a scandal, "Caught you, scoundrel." As a result, the unlucky manufacturer barely begged for her forgiveness. Our heroine doesn't look so haughty for no reason. In fact, she was in a desperate situation. She wasn't just strolling. Her patron found out that the girl was seeing several other men simultaneously and abandoned her. Camellias often faced such situations. And then he told others about it, leaving the girl without support. If she doesn't find a new patron urgently, she'll have to sink to the lowest depths of prostitution, and she remembers well what that is. How did it happen that one man's opinion was valued more than human life? 2 years ago, as a young and naive girl, she came from the provinces to Moscow, dreaming of an acting career. An entrepreneur promised her a lucrative contract, offering to pay with a night of love, and then kicked her out onto the street. She was an orphan and a commoner, with no one to turn to for help. With her last bit of money, she bought a newspaper and found an advertisement for a well-paid job as a maid, which was her last hope. In the Russian Empire, there was a huge recruitment network supplying girls to brothels. Recruiters in luxurious attire lurked for their victims in employment agencies, promising huge sums of money for work as governesses or seamstresses. There was also illegal trafficking of kidnapped girls who were supplied to brothels. Such criminal traffickers were called mackerels. Another popular trick was publishing advertisements in newspapers for well-paid jobs as maids or waitresses. Arriving at the specified address in the advertisement, the girls ended up in a brothel. Our heroine didn't immediately understand where she ended up. There was no sign on the door, but the house looked too bright, extravagant, and showy. Finding out that it was a brothel, she wanted to run away, but there was nowhere to run. Yesterday, she rented not a bed, but just its third, with her last money, and today there wasn't even money for that. The brothel keeper, a madam, knew well how to persuade someone to stay. Seeing that the girl could barely stand on her feet, she offered her breakfast, and then, after feeding her incredible delicacies, began to convince her that within a month the girl could leave, having earned money for a return ticket home. Seeing that the initial shock had passed, the madam started showing her expensive fashionable dresses and suggested just sitting and watching. This was another common trick. Our heroine was persuaded to come to the common hall in the evening, and there it all began. Champagne flowed like a river, professional seducers showered compliments and invited her to dance. This night ended up in bed. That's how she started working in a public house. What would you do in such a situation? Share in the comments. Those who couldn't be persuaded by cunning could be forced into work. Almost half of the women for sale were peasants who came to the city in search of a better life. About 40% were townswomen, and only 3% were from privileged estates. Night butterflies earned good money. In a couple of nights in a first-class brothel, one could earn as much as a seamstress earned for a whole month of work for 12 hours a day. Prostitutes were divided into streetwalkers, blank girls, and those living in public houses, ticketed. The more privileged ticketed ones, having a yellow ticket, underwent a humiliating medical examination twice a week to detect venereal diseases. Blank girls, loners, street, apartment, ran their own business independently. Ticketed ones were required to visit the bathhouse and not evade medical examinations, as well as not to use cosmetics to conceal signs of syphilis. The state also divided brothels into 3 categories. The most fashionable houses of tolerance were on Legovsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. Our heroine found herself in a brothel on Potemkin Street. Alexander Kuprin described it in the story Staff Captain Rybnikov as something between an expensive public house and a luxurious club, with a luxurious entrance, with a stuffed bear in the front hall, with carpets, silk curtains, and chandeliers, with footmen in tailcoats and gloves. Everything here was drowning in tasteless luxury, tussore silk, Persian carpets. A huge crystal chandelier illuminated the common hall, where guests played cards, chose a companion for the night, and danced. The staircase led to the second floor to the dining room and apartments. Prices reached 10 rubles per night. To earn such money in any other legal job, a girl would have to work for a whole month. But was it a pursuit of easy money or a matter of survival? Brothels for the middle class were already without soft furniture and other luxuries. Here came modest officials and modest officers. Here worked girls who had lost their initial freshness. They had to work much harder. Each category of brothels had its production norm. Things were even worse in the cheapest establishments, such as the famous Malinnik on Senaya Square. Vsevolod Krestovsky described it in St. Petersburg slums as 14 apartments occupied by 13 dens of the darkest, terrifying debauchery. Imagine dirt, poverty, and visitors, a crowd of tramps, thieves, and murderers. Visiting such a place was cheap but life-threatening. What drove people to go to such places remains only a matter of conjecture. If work in upscale brothels started in the evening, then in cheap houses, visitors were received even during the day. Work here was excruciating. The number of clients was several times higher, the work was so painful, and the madams were merciless. According to statistics, about 6 prostitutes died in one such brothel in 6 months. Streetwalkers were considered the lowest of the low. Street prostitution attracted newcomers or professionals who, due to alcoholism and diseases, lost their attractiveness, working in public houses and gradually descending lower and lower. There was no way back from there. But why didn't society give them a second chance? Was prostitution really worse than, for example, theft? Nikolai Sveshnikov in his memoirs tells the tragic story of a prostitute from the slums, whom everyone called Cork. Still a young woman, she looked 60. From a young age, she worked first at Malinnik, then moved to the streets. She was always drunk and dirty. One of her eyes was knocked out, her face swollen from beatings. Now all she had left was to beg from traders at the market, collecting scraps, rotten vegetables, or herring tails. She then sold these scraps to other residents of Vyazemsky Lavra, the city's largest criminal den. Our heroine ended up in a first-class brothel. She handed her passport to the madam, and together they went to the medical police committee, where they exchanged it for a yellow ticket, replacing identification for prostitutes. From now on, she was called Josephine. French-style names were popular among prostitutes in brothels. The yellow ticket, known to us from classic literature, not only identified the priestess of love and gave her the right to work, but also contained rules designed to stop the spread of venereal diseases. Why it was yellow is still debated. The most popular version is that they were made of low-quality paper, which quickly turned yellow. With the acquisition of the yellow ticket, routine life began for our heroine in the brothel. Colleagues quickly taught her where to keep the money, what outfits to wear, what to do to avoid contracting syphilis for as long as possible, play the guitar, and recite poetry. Girls were not allowed to leave the brothel. The yellow ticket prohibition was in effect, depriving them of the right to go out into the city. That morning, our Josephine went downstairs for breakfast. The girls got up late, catching up on sleep after the night. In higher and middle-class brothels, they were fed to the slaughter. At the table, conversation flowed. The girls discussed the events of the night. Then, in dressing gowns, they went to the salon, knitted, sewed, read newspapers, and, of course, gossiped. Today they were discussing a wealthy old man who had taken a liking to our Josephine. In the 19th century, spiritual sustenance for prostitutes was replaced by romances with regular customers or someone from the staff. But all these romances hardly had a chance to continue. According to industry rules, a priestess of love changed 2 to 3 public houses a year to prevent clients from feeling satiated with the same faces. I believe that whoever a person is, they will always crave love in one of its manifestations. Closer to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Josephine and her colleagues started preparing for the evening. Priestesses of love took baths, applied creams and lotions to their skin. Then the hairdresser came and did their hair. At 5 or 6 in the evening, the girls went down to the dining room for dinner. They were fed abundantly and deliciously. This was a way to keep the girls in the brothel and make them more attractive to clients. After dinner, the girls went to dress up. The dress code was peculiar: dressing gowns, stockings, low-cut dresses. It was time to greet the first clients. Josephine, like all her other friends, quickly accumulated huge debts to the brothel madam. By law, the girls handed over 3/4 of their earnings. In return, the madam sold them dresses 3 times more expensive and taught them to play the guitar or mandolin, as well as other skills necessary for work. Some priestesses of love owed crazy amounts, up to 300 rubles. But such gigantic sums didn't scare the girls. They casually waved their hands, saying, "We'll pay," just to avoid ending up in the hospital. Night butterflies lived in constant fear of contracting syphilis. There were no antibiotics then, and the disease was incurable. Doctors could only contain the disease's progression. Josephine and her friends understood well that they could get sick at any moment. They constantly talked about it, and the fear grew before the next examination, which was once a week, escalating into panic when one of them was found to be ill. And it happened often. According to statistics from medical committees at the end of the 19th century, at least 50% of prostitutes were syphilitic. The disease was their sentence. Those who fell ill lost their jobs, were placed in the hospital, and from there was only one way: to live out their short remaining life in the slums. Almost no one could escape this contagion. The life of women of easy virtue was short in any case, regardless of the status of the establishment where they worked. They quickly left expensive public houses. Work literally destroyed them from within. To forget, they started drinking a lot. Alcohol turned them into old women. And then down the beaten path. First, they moved to cheaper establishments, sliding lower and lower, inevitably ending their lives in the slums as streetwalkers. According to terrible statistics, most women, almost 73%, could only work for 5 years before burning out. Only 1 in 5 made it to 10 years, and only 5% worked for 15 years. Colossal female mortality. That evening, something happened that changed Josephine's life. One of the regular clients offered her to become his kept woman, his camellia. He was unpleasant to her, too old and disgusting, but it was a different status and a different life. She had her own carriage now. The client rented her a luxurious house. Like other camellias, she attracted several more patrons. Compared to the public house, the life of a camellia was more pleasant. In brothels, women were squeezed to the last drop, but it was not easy for kept women either. Russian writer and journalist Dmitry Bojemsky described a 30-year-old camellia as a woman who looked like a perfect old lady in the mornings due to eternal revelry, alcohol, and lack of sleep. The lively and friendly Josephine quickly became a nervous wreck. She lived in constant fear that one patron would find out about another. She constantly looked for new reasons to get money. But the money disappeared like water, nothing could be saved. Then disaster struck. The patrons found out about each other. Josephine snapped out of her memories. It had been a week since she had been riding in a carriage in search of new patrons, trying all known methods, but nothing worked. The money was running out. There was nothing to pay for the luxurious mansion. She didn't want to return to the brothel. Now, it seemed, she would have to descend to the next level, to become a tolerant lady and part with her freedom and luxurious life. Contrary to common misconception, any priestess of love could quit this profession. The rules of maintaining brothels stated that a girl could voluntarily leave the house of tolerance at any time, and no one had the right to prevent it, even if she had debts to the madam. Many girls dreamed of leaving, wishing to get married, but only a few succeeded. The luckiest ones saved money and opened their own brothels. They could return the yellow ticket and get their passport back for several reasons. For example, if they wanted to enter a poorhouse, get married, or at the demand of a guardian. Any surrogate could become a guardian. But in reality, very few left the profession. Vladimir Okrohov, in his work Return to Honest Labor for Fallen Girls, tells the story of a mother who found her daughter in a brothel and tried to take her away, which was allowed by law. At first, the madam categorically refused to give the girl her clothes, stating that they did not belong to her. When one of the former friends gave her coat to the girl, she was detained in the vestibule and beaten, and her mother was pushed off the stairs so that she fell down and hit her head on the sidewalk. How did the fate of our Josephine unfold? Did beauty help her? Unfortunately, no. The fate of camellias who lost their patron and did not find a new one was unenviable. Bankruptcy and a return to their old work awaited them. After working as a kept woman, Josephine contracted syphilis. And after treatment, she ended up in the slums. In this filth among thieves, vagabonds, and murderers, she ended her short life after just 3 years. What really ruined Josephine, in your opinion? The lure of easy and big money? Financial illiteracy? Or maybe just bad luck? All of this will forever remain a mystery. We can only sympathize with the women whose fate led them down such a path. If you liked the story, give it a like, subscribe, and write comments. See you in new videos.